this is a major, I think, victory for the industry. I mean, at the end of the day, as much as I like to make fun of the regulators, I'm super grateful for them, and I'm grateful that the state of Florida took action in this case. Everyone's playing by the same rules, and at the end of the day, we're doing what's best for the customer, because that's what's going to be best for the industry.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we look at what's changing the pest control industry and take you to the front lines with those who are driving the changes in the industry so you can grow your business. This is Dan Gordon from PCO Bookkeepers and M&A Specialists. We are a outsourced accounting and exit planning firm. And with me, as always, we switched this up this morning, is Donnie Shelton from Triangle Home Services. And Donnie, why don't you introduce yourself?
You know what? I have to say, Dan, that's much improved.
Did I do a good job? I didn't stutter or sputter. Okay. I kind of like the other. I like reading the sponsorships, but let's have you do it.
Okay. All right. Yep. Donnie Shelton, Triangle Home Services, have Triangle Pest as well as Triangle Lawn. And obviously we are a sponsored show, but and we very much appreciate our sponsors and we use our sponsors. But our first sponsor is Coalmarch, a partner. If you want to partner with a team fueling for growth and pest, or with pest and lawn pros, Coalmarch helps you scale smarter. And as always, we ask that if you go over there as a result of listening to the podcast, make those bean counters happy and go to coalmarch.com/podcast. You'll get a month for free when you go there. Our next sponsor is PestSure. For over 40 years, PestSure has been protecting pest control companies with specialized insurance and safety programs because no one understands the industry better. You can learn more at pestsure.com. Also, Voice for Pest, a big fan of that company. They deliver the only phone solution designed specifically for the pest and lawn care professionals, from powerful AI features to deep integrations with most industry CRMs. Discover why leading companies rely on it every day. Take a look at voiceforpest.com/podcast. And this is their first show. We have one final sponsor. We're grateful to have them on board, is Forshaw. Forshaw is a leading family-owned and operated distributor serving pest managed professionals since 1961. They focus on people, partners, and performance, and is what has inspired Foresight, which, if you're not aware of it, we use it here at Triangle. It's Foreshaw's inventory management software to bring clarity, controlled inventory, and support smarter operations and decisions. You can learn more at forshaw.com. And with that, Dan, do you want to talk about our peer groups and introduce our very special guest? Because I want to get into what we got to talk about.
Sure, but I do want to critique your sponsorships. It was very low energy. It's not like me, and I think we need to go back to where we were. But that's, hopefully the sponsors aren't looking for a refund on that one.
Yeah,
so,
I'll tell you what.
Anyway, if you're interested in joining a PMP Industry Insider peer group facilitated by industry veteran David Billingsley, go visit pmpindustryinsider.com/peer groups, or go back to episode 238, where Caleb Cunningham of Justice Pest Control or Pest Services gives you an overview of what it's like. And let's get started. Okay, this is going to be a good one. So today our guest is Mark Ruff. I work with Mark all the time, an attorney who's representing or has been representing Florida pest control operators for many years. He has significant experience representing the industry in a number of areas, including defensive claims involving chemical exposure, WDO inspection reports, repair, retreatment contracts, non-compete agreements, corporate mergers and acquisitions. That's what I work on with Mark all the time, and more. Mark has been a guest several times, including episode 48, Pitfalls in Pest Control, episode 127 and 128, Termite Liability and You, part 1 and 2. And welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Well, good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing good.
All right. So, Donnie, why don't you frame this? This is a very important, if you haven't heard what went down in Florida, and it has ramifications all around the country. But why don't you frame this, Donnie, and then
we'll start with the facts, and I'm going to try to be careful. I think anytime we start talking about legal things, I always get a little antsy because, I don't know, it's just a ton of fun. And Mark, I'm going to keep my attorney jokes to a minimum on this show, just for all of our
appreciated. Well appreciated. Right.
Okay, so this is kind of funny because Dan and I were actually in a meeting in Florida, of all places, when this news broke. But on January 15th, Florida officials announced that they had shut down an illegal door-to-door pest control sales operation. Um, this included a fine for $36,000 against Myra Home LLC and the ban of Grit Marketing LLC from any pest control activity or sales in Florida after they illegally solicited more than 600 pest control contracts. Now, we're going to get into Florida law a little bit later on, but that's what went down. And when we found out about this, I'm like, Dan, we got to dig into this. We got to talk about it because this has been, at least I would say for me, one of the biggest concerns and also one of the biggest issues with door to door. And by the way, before I say any of this, I have experimented with door to door. I failed miserably. I don't have any hard feelings about it. It is what it is. And I know a few other folks who have done the same. But this is, the general business model is they hire salespeople who are 1099 employees. They take them out and they put them on the doors. They sell for the summer. They sell a bunch of contracts. And not employees, but the 1099 contractors leave, and the pest control company services the account, and everyone's happy. At least that's how it's supposed to go down. In this case, it was a little bit different. So much so that Florida took action against this company as well as against Grit Marketing. And so I really want to talk through. We have Mark here on this podcast. I want to talk through what happened. Why did that go down the way it went down? And then what Florida did, and then Dan, at the very end, I want you and I to talk about some ramifications because I think this could be, it seems like some major change usually in the country starts with one court case. And I'm almost wondering if this is going to be the norm for states going forward because this is a serious issue as to what happened. We'll get into the issue here in a moment. So with that was kind of what went down. Mark, can you kind of just big picture, why did the state of Florida feel that, or, say that this was an illegal door-to-door sales operation? Like what specifically were they doing that the state of Florida stepped in and said, no, you can't do that?
I don't think, did the state of Florida step in or did somebody institute an action against them?
All right. Well, let me give you a little background.
Yeah.
Earlier.
Shut up, Donnie.
No, I'm just apparently both of us.
So
we school you.
Again, I represent several pest control companies across the state of Florida, and I was beginning to get some complaints that there were some questionable door-to-door sales going on inside the state, and that their investigation, or my client's investigation, indicated that these 35 or so sales force were out selling without ID cards, without the proper solicitation permits, and without the proper training, and they were being paid 1099. Now, we started collecting that information, and again, a lot of it's hearsay, but then we started seeing things on the internet. We started seeing videos, and we met with the Florida Department of Agriculture and said, look, here's a problem. We are, as a state, we have to have 40 hours of training in category to sell the category of pest control that's being sold. You have to be a W-2 employee. And what was happening is that these companies weren't doing that. So we met with the department and we put on a kind of a presentation saying what's happening. Here's the companies that we believe are violating the law. And my clients were more concerned. They're not concerned about the door-to-door sales, but they felt it was unfair because they were paying W-2. They were having to do the 40 hours of training. They were having to monitor their folks with a certified operator, and they felt that, hey, we're paying all this money to do these door-to-door sales, but these companies are bringing in these folks from out of state who who aren't complying with the law, and they felt it was unfair. And as you can see in this situation, there were 600 illegal contracts sold by individuals who either weren't qualified, didn't have ID cards, or what have you. So after that, the department started looking into various companies that were doing door-to-door sales. And then this issue was brought up again at the Pest Control Enforcement Advisory Council, where it was the department said that they were going to go ahead and investigate Mira, and this is what started that investigation. And they went in and we as a association and as independent pest control companies, we actually brought in some folks that did door-to-door sales and met with the department and said, here's how you prove your case, because the department has to prove their case by clear and convincing evidence. So we actually gave them the information to be able to go in and do their investigation internally into these companies to prove that they were violating the law. Department took action, and this is the result.
So Mark, I have a question. You and I have discussed this the other day, actually, but where I'm from in New Jersey, the DEP, they regulate pesticide application and whatnot. These sales contractors are not applying pesticides. They're not, doing a service. They're selling. Why does the Department of Ag in Florida have jurisdiction over this process? How is it that that they're able to claim jurisdiction, because there's no pesticide being used at the door?
Okay, well, in Florida, the sale of pest control is considered pest control, which gives them regulatory authority to take action. And the way it's sold, one thing I think is important. And, in New Jersey, I can't speak to New Jersey, but, in Florida, stop and think about it for a moment. You have some door-to-door sales knocking on the door saying, Mrs. Gordon, we're going to sell you pest control. And Mrs. Gordon says, well, I got this kind of bug over here and I don't understand. No, here's our contract. This individual is selling pest control with no knowledge of either of the treatment or the organism they're trying to treat. So it's just a blanket sale. Some of these contracts just have pictures on them. Here's the bugs that we treat, but Mrs. Gordon doesn't know. She could have bed bugs, could have an infestation of bed bugs. Not on here, but she can't tell the difference. So there's a difference if the consumer asks the pest control company, I've got this problem, what can you do to fix it? And then what's an untrained person going to say? Yeah, it covers. You end up in a situation where the consumer is affected because the individual who's selling the pest control doesn't have the knowledge to back up what they're saying.
That is exactly the same way it works in North Carolina. North Carolina, it's the department. It's consumer services is an exact part of that. And we had a similar situation to this. It happened years ago. But in our rules, marketing, advertising, soliciting of pest control services is specifically addressed in our rules. And Department of Ag and Consumer Services, they actually have jurisdiction over that. I do have another question. Was this case against Myra? There has to be, I guess my question is why just that specific company? I mean, my thing is like, and I'm not saying we're picking on Myra at all. I'm just wondering, like,
there's a ton of companies doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Like what specifically did they just be? I don't want to call them a scapegoat because I don't want to say that. I mean, but this has to be happening in multiple areas. It certainly happens in our areas that we operate within. And so the department said, well, we're going to start enforcing this across the state. And why Myra specifically? Any thoughts on why that company was the one that was it about grit and it's just this specific situation, or is there more to come? I guess is the question.
I think the reason that Mira was the first case that the department has taken action on is because the evidence that was provided was so clear. That it was between the videos and the statements and the department's investigation, it just seemed like it was clear. Plus, it was demonstrated to the department that, if you're selling these contracts illegally, then you're taking revenue from the guys that are trying to do it right. And again, I am not advocating that, there should be no door-to-door sales. I think that's I think it's a anytime that you can increase your revenue by some new marketing strategy, have at it. But you have to follow the law. You've got to be in compliance. And if you do door-to-door sales, several of my clients, they do door-to-door sales, but their folks have ID cards. They have the training. They have the solicitation permits. They're following the law. Yes, it costs them more money to do that, but they're successful in their door-to-door sales. Whereas if you bring in a company that, is not giving the training, is not, not W-2 employees, those things, it's hurting the industry here in Florida.
How long does it take to get licensed in Florida in order to be able to do it properly? So I join your company today. You're going to put me through a program. And when could I go out? I assume it's the same as me applying pesticides. So how long does that take?
All right, so let's get our acronyms correct. In Florida, a license is for the company. That's the licensee location. You hear them called branches all the time, but each branch has a license to conduct pest control. The pest control operations are overseen by a certified operator in charge in category. And then each of the technicians or sales force, and if they're not a certified operator, have what's called an ID card. So let's say in this situation that you're talking about, that this individual is going to be sales. Well, then it takes 40 hours of training, right? So that ID card, if they're going to go out and sell termite, they're going to go out and sell GHP, they're going to have 40 hours of training in each area of pest control. 40 hours termite, 40 hours GHP, 40 hours of, fumigation, 40 hours of L&O. So that's what it takes. And I think that that's part of, these door-to-door companies that are bringing in these, 30, 40 kids to sell pest control. If you got to give them the 40 hours of training, right, they're flying them in. They got to put them up in a hotel. They got to feed them. They got to be taken care of. That's for that 40 hours before they can even go out in the street and sell. It's not like they're just bringing them in. Here's how you're going to sell and put them on the street. So, there's an overhead component to bringing these kids in. Kids.
So yeah, but they are kids. But if we say, okay, you're going to get 40 hours of termite or wood destroying, you're going to get 40 hours of general. I don't know if they're selling lawn. So that's 80 hours. And I'm assuming that's a state approved course. Can that be done in-house? In other words, okay, can I bite the bullet and pay for the 80 hours? And so in 2 weeks and 1 day, they're ready to roll? Or is there something more? In other words, how long realistically would it take me if I wanted to do this properly to hire somebody and then put them out?
It depends on what they're selling. And you're absolutely correct. If you're going to do all 40, or you're going to do all 4 categories of pest control in Florida, yeah, it's going to, 120, 140 hours of training. Mm-hmm. But if it, like, for example, 160. Right. Okay. That's why I'm a lawyer, because I don't do math well. But
right. Well, you beat me down. I figured I'd.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, in this situation, if they're only selling GHP, then it's 40 hours of training. I mean, mm-hmm. just in.
But if they get a question about termite, what do they say? I cannot address this issue, or
yeah, but they're not selling. Right. They're not selling termite.
Well, somebody asks, because if they do sell baiting, right?
Well,
I don't know.
So there's another piece in this press release that really got my attention. I want to make sure we spend some time on it, which is, it says, additionally, MHR Home obtained pest control identification cards for individuals who were not employees of MHR Home, but independent contractors through grid marketing, a violation of Florida law, meaning that they did have pest control identification cards, but I guess by law, this was not, they have to be actual employees, not 1099. And I know we kind of mentioned this before, but that's another piece of this. And so simply bringing someone or bringing a contractor in, I guess in the state of Florida now, there's state regulations. And if you're listening to this wherever you're at, you should know where this is, especially if you're going to get into the door-to-door side of things. But So this was another piece of this, right? Of getting pest control identification cards for folks who were not employees. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, you have to remember that your ID card has to be aligned with the company that's employing you. So you can't take, Gordon Pest Control and then, go work for Ruff Pest Control with the Gordon Pest Control ID card. You got to switch over because remember they have to be under the supervision of a certified operator. So that certified operator is and responsible to make sure that everybody that he or she is supervising has an ID card with the company that they're representing.
Got it. Got it. So in this
Donnie,
case, if they'd had, if I was going to say, so if they would have had one for Grit Marketing would have had to have had basically like a branch. They would have had to be the licensee. And I want to be careful with terms here because terms in Florida are different than North Carolina. And I know that you mentioned before about defining these terms, but I guess my question is if they would have had like Grit Marketing ID cards, and that would have been a certified operator, branch manager, whatever it is that you guys call them in Florida, that would have been legal because that was who they were actually working for. They were not working for.
But Grit would have to be doing the work, not Mirror.
Yeah, it's just okay. Yeah. So anyway, you had a question, Dan.
Yeah. So you told me that we discussed this the other day, and you said that this is not that different than North Carolina, but that there's a grace period that some of these guys come in with. Explain what you were talking about that, and ask and Mark chime in if this is a way to get this done. By the way, I'm not trying to look for a way to get it done. I'm looking for a way so that you can understand it, right?
Doesn't sound like that to me, does it?
Well, I have lots of door-to-door clients, so I have.
So in our state, and I say our state, we do operate multiple states, but in North Carolina, there's a minimum hours requirement, not deadline. There's no within X number. There is so for example, there's a 24-hour requirement that you have to have training on mixing pesticides. And this is if you're going to sell. It doesn't matter if you're going to apply it. This is anyone who is in the business of pest control. So if I'm selling it on the door, if I'm applying it, you have to have at least what's called an RT card. And you have to do some sort of annual training. And that has to be signed off by a licensee. And it has to be supervised. And so in the case of, like, for example, let's say there's a 24-hour OJT, I think they have like 60 days to get that done, sometimes 90 days, depending on the situation. So what could potentially happen is that there's a licensee, a tech that's riding with them or whatever, and you've got these reps out. And before they even run out of that timeline to be done, they're already done with the season. So they're in for a month and a half. They're in a market for a month and a half, or they're with a company for a month and a half. Let's say like a 1099 contractor. They could completely fly under the radar and never hit that requirement. Now, supposedly, before they're even allowed out, that is supposed to be done. But then there's that slippery slope of, well, they're on training right now. So it's a really gray area. That really needs to be, in my mind, it needs to be cleaned up. It needs to be clarified because in this case, potentially you could be in 3 different markets for 3 different months and you would never be enforced to meet this requirement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but in North Carolina, do you have to have an ID card before you go out and sell?
It's a great question.
Well, but that's the whole point. And I think most states, some of the state statutes I looked at, and in Florida as well, you can't sell without an ID card. So yes, there may be this period that says, look, you got 30 days to get an ID card. And what you're stating is that, well, within that 30-day period, I could come in, sell, and get out, and then not have an ID card. Can't do that in Florida. In Florida, you still have to, yes, there is a provision in the statute that says the minimum time you have to get an ID card is X, but you can't go out there and sell without an ID card. You have to have that on you in Florida, and you have to have training. So, yeah, just because you have this 30-day grace period doesn't mean you can go out there and sell pest control. You still need the training and you still need the ID card. You still need the solicitation permit. You still need to be a W-2 employee. So it
It
doesn't
it
really
it
work. And
gets it gets danced around quite a bit. I mean, Myra might have been the one that got hit here, but I can tell you from firsthand experience that I've seen this operate very loosely. And this whole idea. I mean, listen, I actually applaud it. I think this should. And again, I'm a fan of door to door. I'm not. I don't. But I do believe when we don't. When the goal of door to door is not to have the training, not to do, you know what I'm saying? Like it's a real issue for our industry, and it's not doing the industry a good favor. I mean, in North Carolina, it says you got to say within 75 days of hiring an employee is one that has to have done. And it says that they do have to carry an ID card. But again, going back to what I was saying before, the way I've seen this kind of work is, well, they've got someone kind of around, and then if someone gets asked, they're on the job training. So there needs to be a lot of clarity. I feel like we're very much like Florida, but I think there might be a few areas that we're not the same. But I
So
mean, going back to what you were saying, Dan. I mean, it is absolutely feasible that someone could come in, sell door to door, and still skirt this. At
this is
least
a
in
huge
yeah.
part of the industry, and I don't think that they're just going to be scared off. So the question is, what they're going to try to do is start to comply. So let's just pivot to some of the consumer protections that people have for products and services brought on the door, Mark. So if I buy something, what can I do as a consumer? Because I know you hear a lot about people getting locked into these contracts, and it's not just pest control. Phone, switching phone services and things like that. What are some of those consumer laws that me as a consumer should be aware of?
well, in Florida, you have, as in most states, you have a 3-day right of cancellation, or what they call a cooling off period. So if you do have the door to door sales, generally within the 3-day period, you can, in writing, or sometimes a lot of companies just accept a verbal over the phone, can terminate services. The question becomes what happens within that 3-day period if the homeowner agrees to take the service. And in that situation, then there's a question on whether you can cancel that service, or whether the company can collect in equity, or what they call quantum merit, to recover for the services that were applied. Now, one thing that is we did see in some of these door-to-door sales contracts is that they have a termination provision that says, look, if you terminate within that 1-year period, you got to pay us X amount of dollars. Felt that was a little overreach, and the industry is actually working with the department and is going to meet with the Attorney General's office to look at that, to say, look, is this egregious? Is this overreaching? To have a door-to-door sales where you have a buyout clause that, $300-$400 to get out of the contract, and then they could enforce it. Now, whether these companies enforce that or not, I don't know. But, the industry is taking a look at that to see whether that is something that needs to be addressed.
So you were talking about, you have clients who do door to door that in a legitimate and legal way. So if I were a company that wanted to do door to door, what is that legal and legitimate way? From soup to nuts, what do I need to do? Clearly, I can't bring in contractors from out of state that are untrained and just stick them on the doors who have sales training. So how do you do this properly?
Well, in Florida, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Again, it's probably maybe a little different in North Carolina or another
But Florida
state.
seems to be more stringent. Like if you're doing it in Florida, you're probably,
Well, if you're going to have a sales force, whether that sales force, it usually typically is a sales individual. A lot of them are certified operators, but the bulk of them are ID card holders. Well, they have to have 40 hours of training in the category of pest control that they're going to sell. They have to have an ID card with that company, right? They have to be a W-2 employee. That's clear in our statute. Now, a lot of people, you've heard some of these arguments out there. Well, the IRS code says that a 1099 can be an employee. Well, not in Florida. In Florida, they have to be a W-2. And again, the idea here is that the individual is being supervised and is an employee of a company, right? They're just not a fly by night. They actually have the training. They actually are being supervised. And again, in most situations, a lot of my clients say, "Hey, look, I need." A lot of counties require solicitation permits to go out and solicit. And so you've got to go to a county by county basis to obtain these solicitation permits. And if you don't have them, then you're illegal on the state side, not just on the regulatory side. So those are the things that basically, and they're pretty simple. I mean, if you stop and think about it, you hire somebody, you put them in a class, or they could go to PMU at UF for a week. They could, be trained by the certified operator there in the company, do a ride along, whatever, to understand, the basis of pest control. This isn't hard stuff.
So one of the things that you just mentioned is solicitation permits. And I know that certain counties, when you get that, want to do background checks. And those background checks can take a while. Is that something that you're seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a cost. And again, there is a cost to a pest control company that is following the law and following the books. There is a cost that if the overhead expense is being expended to do it legally, that a lot of these door-to-door companies coming into the state, they're there for the summer, they're out, they're not paying those costs. So it's not equitable.
Well, I know. So I live in Florida for the winter, and we have an HOA, and the HOA is really to solicit in our development. They put you through the ringer before you're allowed in, and it takes a little while. So I'm sure that we're not the only ones doing it.
Well, recently, if you saw the letter that came out from the Commissioner of Agriculture here in Florida, now if you put out a no solicitation sign, right, it has to be a certain size, and you put it out, and they solicit that house, first time violation, slap on the wrist, but the second time is a criminal offense. So, this no solicitation sign's got some teeth.
Yeah.
And you hear those, and you hear the counter arguments from the door-to-door companies saying, well, it's my First Amendment right to be able to go in and solicit.
No, not to knock on somebody's door. By the way, if somebody doesn't want it, you're not going to sell it to them anyway, right?
I'm not saying it's
adversarial.
Well, let's bring it. I mean, I know here in North Carolina, if you service within that 3-day, actually the law says that you are not entitled to any compensation. So as an owner or as a business, you take on risk, because technically, if you perform that service within that cooling period and the customer decides to cancel, there is one exception that says if it's an emergency service, then they're not entitled to that. But that's a whole other, and I'm not an attorney. And so I'm just telling you what the rule says. And, people I'm sure could slice that all up as to whether or not pest control is considered an emergency or not. But I want to real quick, Dan, come back to this, and I want to talk through why is this such an issue, meaning like turning someone into a W-2 employee, the benefit of being a 1099. Now, I know these, but I want to talk this through a little bit, because this is a big deal.
Yeah, we discussed this a little bit before, and I don't want to get into the tax issues because there are, but there is something, Mark, as we talked about it before. The IRS actually has, or Department of Labor and IRS has a checklist of things that make you a W-2 or a 1099. And if you go down the checklist, these guys are W-2s. They are employees. Their time is controlled by the company. There's, they get paid at regular intervals. They, I know that a lot of door-to-door companies create fact patterns that are different. That the kids set up, their own S corp, and then they invoice the company. But sometimes you have to go substance over form, right? And so I think that if you're selling 5 or 6 or 7 days a week for one company, you're a W-2. You are. And there are some tax benefits to being a 1099, but I think that the other thing is that the marketing company gets to control their team as opposed to the company, right?
Right. So. Yeah. And I mean, the other part, and I mean, maybe you can comment a little bit on this, Mark, is it almost seems like there's a lot more. I don't want to say liability because if it's 1099, but I mean, it really puts it on the company now. Like if you're going to employ door-to-door contractors, that's a very different prospect than hiring a door-to-door team that works for your specific business. I mean, for me at least, I mean, as an owner, if I've got not saying I wouldn't care about a contract, and obviously if they're representing our company, they're representing our company. But that's a big difference between having a contractor do something versus one of your people. Because I mean, you mentioned this earlier, Mark. It's like, well, we got to make sure that they have the training, right? If they come in under Triangle or whatever company it is, I mean, to me, that's a whole different level of engagement from the company side than as if I'm just hiring a contractor and they're going to take care of it. Does that make sense? I mean, like, if they're coming under the Triangle hat, there's very specific training requirements I have to make sure they meet. There's obviously all the other things that we have to talk about, benefits and, is there a category that I can put them as a W-2 employee that all that stuff doesn't apply? I know that there is, but I'm just simply making a point. Like it's not that's a big deal, I guess, is, for summer sales to bring them in as employees. It's much easier to do it as a 1099, but in this case, it's not legal. And I think that's probably the part that we should hammer down on. So
that's correct.
For both of you, I want to talk through real quick before we finish up. We're getting close to the time here. This is an action that was taken, from the state to this company. Dan, you said this before. Probably what's going to happen is a lot of companies are going to look at this, especially door-to-door sales companies, and are going to say, okay, we got to start doing this differently. What are the ramifications overall for the industry? And when I say the industry, I'm talking about mainly from the pest side as well from the door-to-door side. And I know this is all pontificating at this point, which I love to do. But I'll start with you first, Dan. What do you think is the ramification of this case, if at all?
So the first time I ran into door-to-door was in the 90s. There were two big firms that were outsourcing basically to Terminix and Work, and it wasn't really a big deal. It wasn't a problem. But we actually tried to hire one of them. We were in New Jersey, Pennsylvania. They didn't want to come up because the weather, it didn't get warm until, May, and they would rather be in the South. And it worked great, right? And there have been a lot of multi-millionaires made out of this door-to-door stuff. However, one of the things that you see is that the industry is growing, and it's growing at quite a clip. And I would argue that the reason the industry is growing is because of door-to-door, because half of the door-to-door sales that are made, they're taking the contract from, and I don't know whether it's half, but I'm taking the contract from a competitor. The other half are people who don't know that professional pest control is a thing, and they buy it, and now they're in, the revenue for the industry. And the industry has been growing at a really nice clip over the past 10 or 15 years. And I would attribute it to door-to-door. So I think it's a good thing overall. Now, the one thing that you had mentioned before is, if you're a door-to-door company and you do door-to-door and you do it right, that's great. If you're a marketing company that Triangle hires this year, goes into the Raleigh market, sells 3,000 customers, and the next year you don't hire them, so they go and work for one of your competitors, and they have all of the names, and they go back to those customers and slam them into the new company, that's a problem. Right. So that's unethical, probably illegal. And I don't know whether so there's, where there's money to be made, there's always this gray area that people try to jump over and, or toe the line. But done properly, I believe it's a very good thing for the industry. Done improperly, it's really bad. It gives the industry a black eye. So that's my opinion.
Well, I
Mark,
have,
what's your take?
my take on this is that I have clients who legally apply door-to-door sales. And you're absolutely right. This company has grown exponentially by using door-to-door sales, but, making sure it's done right. And I represent that company, and I've watched their tremendous growth through door-to-door sales. But it's done legally. It's done with ID cards. It's done with W-2. It's done, and they are doing well, and that company is expanding into other markets. So you're right, Dan. It does expand. It does expand. It is profitable. But again, I want to make sure everybody understands this. I don't care. If you want to do door-to-door sales, have at it. Just do it illegally.
Right.
That's all I care about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And level the playing field. That's all.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to levy one opinion here because, I will say this. I do think it's going to change. Part of this agreement was that Grit Marketing LLC, quote, will no longer engage in any regulated pest control activities in the state of Florida, including but not limited to soliciting contract for pest control services. I think this is going to change the industry in the sense of, these marketing companies that provide the 1099. Like it's going to be a very difficult thing, especially if you have to have them as employees. I think in one regard, this case is going to change how that works. Or you're going to see these companies that, in the case of Grit, they're going to go to states where the regulatory environment is a little bit more open. North Carolina is very much like Florida. I'm sitting here reading some of the things that, some of the bills and some of the rules and regs in Florida. It's not very different than North Carolina. In fact, they're very, very similar. And so I think what we're going to see is that these marketing firms are going to operate in states where there's not this much oversight because I don't see a good business model. If you're getting kicked out of the state, well, first of all, there's a big issue there, right? That's a problem number one.
There's more pest pressure in states like Florida, so you want to be there, do it right.
Right.
I think that you're gonna. It's funny when I got into pest control many years ago in New Jersey. There were all these guys who did termite work, and they advertised in the newspaper, any size house, any termite job, $395, and we tried to fight it, and we couldn't. It just they were illegal. We'd shut one down, and the next one would start. And what these guys were doing is that they were catering to the real estate market. So, you got a WDI and it said you had termites. So you hire one of these guys and that's that. Can we eliminate all of the people who are doing illegal things? I don't think so. But I think that what you're going to find is that some of these companies who are making millions of dollars doing this, that is the goose that laid the golden egg. So they're going to do it. They've got to improve their processes because why lose all that money? Why go out of business? So,
yeah, for sure.
Well,
for sure.
Kind of one thing in Florida, you have to, let's put it this way. The Florida Department of Agriculture has a administrative complaint line where you can make an anonymous, a call to say, hey, I think this is illegal. That has gone out to industry, and industry is looking for illegal door-to-door sales, and they can make an anonymous call to the department. The department can come out and take a look at it. And, recently in an FPMA meeting, Florida Pest Management Association meeting, we said, look, you see something, report it. It may not be anything, but, we need to get our arms around this. And I want to say one thing, Donnie, you were saying that, how hard it is and some clarity on your statute. There is an issue in the industry that we don't like messing with our statute. Because if you open that statute up, you don't know what you're going to get, because you might you may try to clarify something and you may end up getting something you don't want. So, we protect that statute. We like it the way it is. We can live with it. If we got to work with something, let's see if we can put it in an administrative rule. But we don't like opening that statute.
Mm-hmm. It's no different. I fly and we have FARs, and then they put out what they call advisory circulars where they give an interpretation because that's much easier than changing the FAR. And anyway, yeah, I don't listen. This is why you do attorney stuff and I do business owner stuff, right? So,
well, Dan was telling me you're a heck of a pilot too.
oh no, he's
military pilot.
We're not going to talk about that. Anyway, Mark, really appreciate you being on the show. This has been fantastic. And if you're listening to this, I think this is a major, I think, victory for the industry. I mean, at the end of the day, as much as I like to make fun of the regulators, as much as I like to, complain about government, I will say I am very appreciative of our regulatory agencies in our industry. It is what makes us a professional industry. It's, the regulatory environment is what keeps people who don't have the best interest of the industry, don't have the best interest in the consumer, only has self-interest involved. It keeps them out of our industry and keeps our industry strong. And so as much as I like to give them a hard time, I'm super grateful for them. And I'm grateful that the state of Florida took action in this case, because we do have to be good stewards of it. And we have to make sure that everyone's playing by the same rules. And at the end of the day, we're doing what's best for the customer, because that's what's going to be best for the industry for the long term. And with that, Dan, anything to add before we finish out?
I don't. I really appreciate you being on, Mark. It's very enlightening, and stay tuned. I mean, I don't think this is going away. It's going to be interesting. So
neither do I.
I'd like to just add to Donnie's comment. I appreciate the Florida Department of Agriculture for taking action, listening to the industry, and inserting itself into these investigations, into these illegal companies. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, just a reminder, all the resources and topics that we talk about on the show and today are going to be available on the podcast website. Just take a look at pmpindustryinsider.com. Take a look under show notes for this show. We always ask that you rate and if it's positive, if it's negative, we ask that you call Dan, because he really appreciates that. With that, we're going to sign off. We'll see you all next time. Take care.
Nice to see you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.